Hello everyone, this is Shannon from Not So Po, and today I'm here to do a review of Cantoras by Carolina De Robertis. This is such an amazing queer historical fiction set in Uruguay in the 1970s and 80s that I heard about from Adri at Perpetual Pages. If you are interested in hearing an Own Voices queer Latinx review of this, I so highly recommend Adri's review, which I will link below. It is completely what convinced me that I needed to pick this book up, and I was not disappointed. I absolutely loved it. So let me go ahead and tell you a little bit about what the book is about and all of the reasons why I loved it. So this story centers around a group of 5 young women in Uruguay in the 1970s, and it follows them as they grow and mature into the 1980s and even more into the modern day, and really looking at the way that they have formed a community in order to really survive as queer women during this time in Uruguay where there was a military dictatorship that was very, very anti-gay. So they form this friendship, and they also find themselves a haven in this remote seaside town, Cabo Polonio, where basically nobody goes, and they find a way to be themselves and to be authentic and to be true to each other as well. The story follows them over many, many years in the way that they mature as women, the choices they make, the way that their friendship evolves, and just this whole found family and found self messaging of the book is so strong and so beautiful. There are quite a few heavy topics in this book, so definitely a lot of content warnings. Things like rape and torture and conversion therapy and suicide, just many, many heavy topics that you would somewhat expect in a political dictatorship type of situation. So it is a very heavy book, but it's also one that is filled with so much love and so much heart and really, really worth your time. So now let me talk about some of the really, truly many reasons why I adored this book, why it just spoke so much to me. And I think the first reason why I loved this book so much was that it was so beautifully written. The language was just stunning. The imagery that was used just drew me in. It was so immersive and engaging, and I just can't get over how much I loved the writing itself. I want to give you just a few quotes from the book so that you get a feel of the beauty of the language and the way that the imagery is used. So the first quote is about a woman kind of reflecting on her relationship with her husband, and she is queer and he is very much in the mold of the, dominant masculine patriarchy type of husband. She was his medicine, the shot of whiskey meant to drown his sorrows. He drank her bitterly. Afterward, he'd fall asleep and she'd lie in the sour aftertaste, his bitterness lodged under her skin. I think that just really evokes the way that relationship was working for them. Another quote is about a different woman dealing with some grief. What surprised her was the sorrow, how it poured in, flooding. Sorrow, a sea filling the kitchen, submerging her, submerging the counter and her father and the knives and the dish rack, so that she stood under its waters, breathing not air, but sorrow. And I think that imagery of the way that sorrow and grief can just pour over you and drown you is so powerful. Another reason that I love this book so much that is, I think, related to the power of the language is the sense of place. This book really makes you feel like you see and understand and are immersed in the places that it occurs. So you feel in Cabo Polonio, the seaside town, you feel the sea and the sun and the salt and the air and the waves and the desolation and the remoteness of it. You feel all of that. It's just very immersive. And in the scenes that take place in Montevideo, the capital, you feel the oppressive nature of the regime, the fear and the way that they have to be careful when talking to anybody, the way that they're silenced, the way that they live their daily lives going from place to place, kind of cowering against all of the military dictatorship. And I think that those senses of place just really make this book completely immersive, and I really, really strongly felt that and loved it. Another aspect of this book that worked so well for me was the historical and political nature of the book. So I absolutely love reading about history, but I really, really love historical fiction because you move from reading about history, which can feel sometimes like reading about facts, to historical fiction, which completely immerses you in that time period and lets you feel like you're living through that experience. And this really felt like it. You really understood the way that these women, when they were young and their families went through the onset of the dictatorship, how they have these memories of being young children where they could go with their families to parties, or they could walk home at night and it would be okay. And then the way that that onset of the dictatorship surprised everyone and left them reeling and so afraid, and how neighbor was turning on neighbor. You couldn't gather in groups, you couldn't go out at night, you had to always be so careful and so silent, and just that oppressive feel of the regime really makes you aware of what's going on. You also have this fear of the way that political dissidents are handled, the disappearances. Everybody in this story knows somebody who was taken, who was tortured, who was imprisoned for decades. It's just that feel of living through this period of history that maybe, otherwise I wouldn't have read about or wouldn't have known about. It's so strong and just such an excellent part of this book. Another thing that this book explored so well is just the oppression of the characters, the way that women were oppressed by society and the way that queer people were oppressed by both society and the military dictatorship. So in this story, you have these queer women who are dealing with oppression from basically all sides. They are hemmed in, they are silenced, they are forced into conformity. They're not allowed to be who they are. In terms of their queerness, they can't talk to anybody about it, even their families. The families, even if they suspect, they don't want to ask, they don't want to know. If anybody outside finds out about it, any relatives or neighbors or anybody, they could be taken, tortured, killed. So there's so much fear of exposure there. There's also so much oppression just for being women. The expectations that are placed on them to be good daughters or to be perfect wives, the expectation that they must get married, the expectation that they can't live their lives the way that they want. And in many ways, the way that all of this oppression not only keeps them from being who they are, but sometimes from even realizing who they are, from even realizing for a long time that they are queer or that they are somebody who wants to do something different with their lives. It's just this entire feeling of heaviness and oppression and lack of options and choice and voice. It's very, very, very strong in this book. Even though this book talks about the way that these queer women were oppressed by society and the military dictatorship, this story really is actually about their empowerment. So much of this story is just focusing on the way that these women came together to form a community. They found a space where they could be authentically themselves, where they could empower themselves to have a voice, to recognize each other, to see each other, to validate each other, and to build up that community and space to make sure that they could get through even the most oppressive society without losing who they were. It's such a beautiful message. It was so, so moving. And I just really loved the focus of this book on that. There's a really beautiful quote about the first time they go to Cabo Polonio and the way that that feels so freeing for them. How it spooled out, ravenous, seeming infinite, until time put up its borders, and she rolled it all back to a corner of herself, so she could make room for the good girl, the good wife. Every picture, the good wife. Only now, today, for the first time, things were different, and she didn't have to make even a centimeter of space for the good wife for 7 days. 7 blisteringly sweet beach days where there were no toilets and no telephones and no husbands. This book has such a beautiful message of empowerment, has such a beautiful celebration of queer women who really refuse to fall into this tiny little space that is allocated for them, and instead demand that they have more space, they have room, they have a voice. And I love that message so, so much. So overall, I think that this book is absolutely stunning. It is so beautifully written. The historical and political context that it's in is absolutely fascinating. And that message of empowerment of queer women is truly beautiful. I highly, highly recommend this book, and I hope that you pick it up. Again, I've linked below Adri at Perpetual Pages review of this, which I also think touches on so many more details about the book and why you should read it. So if you're not convinced, check out their video as well. And if you have read this book, or if you're interested in reading it, if you have any comments, any recommendations, anything at all, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.